growing outrage over the treatment of migrant laborers casts a shadow over the Qatar World Cup. Player protests are shining a light on widespread human rights abuses. But will that change working conditions and stop people from dying on the job? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today on The Newsmakers, we'll look at the treatment of migrant laborers in the Qatar World Cup and across the Gulf. With summer temperatures reaching 50 degrees Celsius and excessive working hours outdoors, migrant laborers building infrastructure for the 2022 Qatar World Cup face conditions that have horrified human rights groups and just about everyone else, including football players. A recent report in the Guardian newspaper claimed 6,500 migrant workers have died in the 10 years since FIFA awarded the tournament to Qatar. Now, everything from 7 new stadiums to a new airport needed to be built from scratch, and hundreds of thousands of mostly South Asian manual laborers would be imported to do the work. A few years ago, Amnesty International began investigating abuses of migrant workers that make up 95% of the country's labor force. They took aim at the kafala sponsorship system, which indentures workers to their employers, leaving them vulnerable to forced labor, unpaid wages, and no option to leave their job or the country. So as the World Cup qualifiers begin, players are speaking out. From Germany, Norway, and the Netherlands to Denmark.
FA, DBU, for several years has been working to make changes in Qatar on human rights and sustainability. We have done this since 2016. We have visited Qatar twice with our Nordic companions, and we have participated to make some changes for the migrant workers and their horrible situation in Qatar. We'll keep doing this. We are now in dialogue with the FAs from more countries, from England, Holland, etc. And we hope to have even a larger pressure on the Qatar authorities.
Now, shows of solidarity and even talk of boycotts have emerged, but any action taken now would be too late for the thousands who've already died and the millions potentially still at risk of abuse in construction and domestic work across the Gulf. Let's talk more about what migrant workers are facing. And joining me now from Doha is Tunon. He's a specialist at the International Labor Organization in Qatar. McGeehan joins us from Nice. He is the founding director of FairSquare, an organization defending workers' rights. And from London, Charlie Eccleshare. He is a sports writer for The Athletic. Thanks all so much for joining us. Nicholas, let me start with you. First, I need to address that report into the thousands of deaths among migrant World Cup construction workers over the last decade. The Qatari government says almost none of them are due to working conditions, and most of them are actually listed as unexplained. How do so many deaths remain unexplained? What is missing in the autopsies and the investigations?
Yeah, Andrea, I'm glad you mentioned you start with the unexplained issue, because that is the issue. In a sense, it's not the 6,500 deaths that's the problem. It's that 69% of those deaths are unexplained. They're marked down as natural causes, or they're marked down as death from cardiac arrest, which is not a cause of death. Now, the reason that's happening is because there are no autopsies and no investigations. Now, that, in many respects, is inexcusable in itself. And when you place these deaths and these unexplained deaths in the context of what we know about the risks to workers' health from the heat and humidity, and from other issues such as pollution, lack of nutrition, excessive working hours, then that's when the very troubling picture emerges. So we do need action on this. We do need very clear steps to protect the health and the lives of workers. And I think that's why a lot of the spotlight on this issue of late has been helpful in driving forward and putting this issue onto the agenda.
Right. Let me ask you, though, Nicholas, what logistically, from what you can see, needed to be done to prevent any workers from actually dying? I mean, is it even possible to prevent it in that kind of heat and that relentless exposure to sunlight?
Yeah, it is. There are very clear guidelines on what to do when you have strenuous work ongoing in hot and humid conditions. You have to take regular breaks and you have to provide hydration and cooled areas for rest. You have to do autopsies to make sure that deaths aren't occurring from heat. You have to do follow-up investigations. You have to release data on this issue so that we can start to build up a better picture of what's happening, and we can encourage people to put in place the proper protective measures and to assess precisely what's happening. And all of that information has been withheld by the Qatari authorities. And despite knowing about this issue for years, I mean, I authored a Human Rights Watch report into migrant worker deaths in 2017 that very clear recommendations to the Qataris. And unfortunately, despite some progress on labour reforms, this is an issue where clearly insufficient progress has been made, and the Qataris have largely sat on their hands. And as we enter another summer, then unfortunately more people are going to die, and they're going to die needlessly.
Okay. Max, your organization got involved. You went to Doha in about 2017, if I'm not mistaken, 3 years or so ago. Tell us, first of all, why your organization had to get involved in helping Qatar address these issues in the first place. And did you discover that the abuse was as bad as journalists and human rights groups had been reporting?
Yeah, the ILO established an office here in Doha about 3 years ago and developed a technical cooperation program together with the government as well as social partners, which outlined the major reforms that needed to take place over the subsequent years. In that time, we've seen major progress, reforms to kafala, the introduction of a non-discriminatory minimum wage, improved social dialogue between workers and employers. So really a lot of progress has been made, including on the safety and health side of things. I think what I'd first like to draw attention to is the number of workers' deaths that has been reported widely in the media and other sources. The 6,500 figure is, I think, misleading at best, because it very much captures the deaths of all non-nationals from 5 countries from Qatar, rather than making a very clear distinction between non-nationals and those who are working, so migrant workers, and then also going further to distinguish between those workers and whether these deaths were work-related. So I think that there is a need to dissect this data a little bit more clearly and report it a little bit more accurately. But I do take on board the point that that a lot of this breakdown, or this detailed breakdown, hasn't been forthcoming from the Qatari government. What I would say is that they have reported to the ILO as part of their obligations, having ratified the Labour Inspection Convention. They're required to submit a report on labor inspection activity over the previous year. Within that, they reported the total number of deaths, and that's public information. Similarly, they've submitted reports to the UN as part of the SDG voluntary reporting on the number of deaths, because this is one of the targets under the Sustainable Development Agenda is reducing workplace fatalities.
Okay.
So there is data out there on worker deaths, but what's needed is really to go further and examine, what was the cause of these deaths, and make sure that this information is used to then prevent further accidents, injuries, and fatalities from occurring.
Fair enough. Max, though, I have to ask, because organizations like Human Rights Watch, whether the numbers they come up with, I mean, The Guardian reported, for example, the 6,500. You can dispute that number, but the fact is the World Cup brought the attention to Qatar. And people like Nicholas and Human Rights Watch had to start investigating. These are the numbers they came up with. Whether the number is accurate or not, the problem is there. And I have to ask you honestly, if it hadn't been for the scrutiny of the World Cup, do you think you would be working on this issue in Doha?
I think the World Cup definitely drew the attention of the world to Qatar, more attention than certainly they've ever seen or witnessed before. So I think a lot of these reforms were accelerated because of the World Cup. The changes that have been put in place, the program that we have together, developed together with social partners and the government, is extremely ambitious, and the time frame is extremely tight. So certainly the World Cup drew the attention, but I would also say that the broader aims of this labor reform agenda are very much in line with the national vision as well. So when we talk about developing a knowledge-based economy, a diversified economy, an economy that protects, a labor market that protects workers and attracts foreign talent and foreign investment. All of this is grounded on ensuring decent working conditions for workers, removing the kafala system, making sure that there is a local pool of workers in the country, making sure that Qatar is an attractive destination for workers and for investment.
Okay. Nicholas, I want to get your response very quickly before I get to Charlie. I mean, is that good enough for you, what you've heard from about the progress that has been made and what the ILO in particular is doing in Doha to address all of these issues?
Well, it's great that the ILO is in Doha. We all support what they're doing. We support their work, but they are there because, I mean, there is further context to it. The ILO is in Qatar because the ILO is about to initiate a commission of inquiry into forced labour in Qatar. That's the backdrop to this. So the backdrop to this is very serious allegations about very serious abuses. I think it's absolutely right for Max to point to the progress that's been made, and they have made some progress on some very key issues. At the same time, it's absolutely right and reasonable for us to point to how far they need to go, how much work has to be done, and that's, I think, what we're doing. On the issue of data, yes, the Qataris have released some data on work-related deaths, but they haven't released any data on what they classify as non-work-related deaths and where they withhold, where they don't do the investigations to determine whether or not work was involved in the deaths.
Okay. Charlie, let me ask you, because we're actually talking about this now in large part because of the actions the players themselves have taken. Talk to us about their reaction. Why did they feel the need to do something, and will it ultimately make a difference, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it has cut in Norway certainly came from more of the grassroots. So you had, it was club-led, saying that they wanted more information, and they've really pushed this idea of the players protesting, and I think they've then responded to it. Whether players will kind of do more and whether it will make a difference, I think we have to wait and see. But certainly it feels like a little bit of momentum. I mean, I think people might say, well, it's happening a bit too late because we're so far down the line. The World Cup was awarded to Qatar in 2010. But, from their point of view, it's better late than never, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, you saw it started with Norway. Few other countries are on board, and at least it's now something that's being asked. Harry Kane, the England captain, was asked about it. So I don't think it's an issue that's going to go away. Whether there'll be sufficient momentum, to take it forward. We've heard boycotts being mentioned. Right. We're a long way off that. We'll have to wait and see.
Let me ask you, Charlie. I mean, where was FIFA's oversight, though? Because these abuses had been exposed far earlier on. And they actually violate FIFA's own charter.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's why people feel that serious questions need to be asked. FIFA as an organization has had a lot of issues, and that's why we're seeing some of these FAs saying that they are going to, demand or certainly ask that FIFA properly investigate this in line with the Qatar government, because as you say, there are clear violations, and I think the fact the start of the qualifying campaign, the road to Qatar, has really has heightened the immediacy of it. Despite, as I said, it was 2010 that the World Cup was first awarded to Qatar. Okay,
Nicholas, I can see you agree there. Let me ask you though. I want to broaden this out because, as we said at the top of the program, this isn't just about Qatar and the World Cup. It's a wider issue across the Gulf. And Nicholas, you'll remember we saw a Kuwaiti social media influencer, her name was Sonduz Al-Katan, attract international headlines when she railed against new laws that would allow migrant domestic workers to keep their passports and have a few days off a month. People around the world were really outraged, but she defended her stance, and she's never apologized. And the truth is she has her supporters. Where is the disconnect here? Because she's obviously not the only one in the Gulf who feels these workers can't be trusted and don't deserve the same labor rights that people in other countries merit.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is not just a Qatari problem. This extends across the Gulf and beyond, where migrant workers are brought in huge numbers, and they're subject to to really intense and sinister and disturbing levels of racial discrimination. I mean, racial discrimination is the issue that is often harder to talk about. It's harder to research, but it is there. It is underpinning this system, and it does underscore the extent of the challenge that we all face in driving forward labour reform. Because unless this pernicious racial discrimination is eradicated, then it's very difficult to give effect to these reforms that Max and others are putting in place.
Right. And more than just racial discrimination, it's almost a kind of just a general mindset. Max, I mean, you've been working in the region for some time now. How do you change that? First of all, the kafala system is great. I know you've said you've been able to dismantle it in Qatar so far. But as we're saying, this is a Gulf-wide problem, Lebanon included as well. How do you change the mindset of people who actually feel we're rich, you're poor, we're kind of helping you survive, so we don't need to change the system?
I think what's happening in Qatar is being looked at through the lens of how it's beneficial to workers. And of course, these changes are very much beneficial to workers. But we also have to look at how this benefits employers and the society and economy as a whole as well. So, for example, with the kafala reforms, the creation of a local labor market not only benefits workers, as I said, but also employers who want to hire locally. They'll be able to hire workers who have experience from Qatar, who know how things work here in the country. They'll be able to reduce the risk associated with cross-border migration and the costs associated with cross-border recruitment. So I think, pitching this and showing how it's a win-win scenario and there's, it's not a zero-sum game is really important in terms of developing legislation and policy reforms in this region. That's what we've seen and that's been observed in Qatar. But if I may, I do want to go back to one point that Nick raised earlier about, that there is still plenty of work to be done here. We're not just sitting back on the laurels and saying, job's done. But very much there's work to be done, and specifically on the issue of safety of workers. I just want to highlight three things. One is that when it comes to data, we are working with the Ministry of Labour, the Ministry of Public Health, as well as the Hamad Medical Corporation to improve the quality of data, the analysis of data, and the use of that data in prevention campaigns. And hopefully soon we'll be able to release some of the findings from that. Secondly, legislation is underway. Legislation is under development with regards to protecting workers during the summer months. There is already a law that prohibits working hours during the summer months, during the hottest period of the year. But this new legislation will expand that window, expand the number of prohibited hours and the days in which these prohibited hours apply. And very importantly, the legislation will also require that workers who work outdoors undertake an annual medical checkup. And that will very much reduce the number of workers who are exposed to conditions who might be susceptible to heat strain and heat-related disorders. This legislation is based on research that we carried out back in 2019 with the ministry, with the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, looking at the impact of heat stress on workers' health and the physiological impact of heat stress. And from that, we were able to gather a number of real insights into how heat stress affects workers and how employers can mitigate it further.
Okay.
We saw that on certain sites where they had a whole raft of heat stress mitigation measures, actually workers' risks were relatively low, particularly when they had the ability to self-pace. So as Nick was saying, hydration is key, clothing is key, work rest ratios are key, but very much central to heat stress mitigation is the ability of workers to tell their supervisors, to tell the safety professionals on site when they need themselves to take a break. And that was really one of the key measures in terms of reducing risk.
Nicholas, let me ask you, hearing that, does that give you confidence for Qatar and the wider Gulf that not only will they be able to stop workers from potentially dying, but that their rights will start to be protected? Are we seeing the beginning of dramatic change that's needed?
Well, potentially we are. If the right pressure is applied, potentially we are. On the kafala reform, for example, what Max is talking about is unprecedented on one level. What we haven't seen is real effect given to that. We haven't seen it taking effect on the ground, but hopefully that will happen. And it's very encouraging to hear about new laws on heat. That's great. But you know, that report, that 2019 report, you know, a central finding that workers can be, you know, can work safely if they can stop working when they want to. Well, that's very, you know, that's not all that encouraging when you consider, you know, just how abusive working conditions can be in Qatar. And when you consider that workers are generally overworked and don't really have any agency or capacity to just down tools. You know, there's encouraging stuff happening. That's undeniable. I think just to take it back to the football issue, though, why this is so important and is that because all this stuff is in place, what we really need now is just extra pressure to get these reforms over the line, to give them real effect. So that's why I know there are those in Qatar who feel this is really counterproductive. It doesn't help. You know, it could derail the process. What we've seen actually is that when criticism is applied, when it's based on facts, it's based on good research, that when people you know, make concrete, solid recommendations, that we can you know, we can hopefully make the progress that we want to.
Right. Max, if I can get to one last issue with you, you know, we do, and you alluded to this just a minute ago, we do have to remember how important this work, for as difficult as it might be, is to the workers themselves and their families back home. So quickly talk to us about the remittances. I mean, this work generates, what this work generates and what it means to millions of people still living in the countries of origin of these workers. It almost qualifies as a necessary evil.
Well, I would say that this, the labor migration experience of millions of workers here in Qatar is having a profound effect on the livelihoods of family members and communities back home. And this will only be increased with the introduction of the non-discriminatory minimum wage, which was introduced just 10 days ago. This increase, we estimate, based on the data that we've analyzed, will affect 400,000 workers, and therefore, you know, a multiplier of that in terms of beneficiaries back home.
Okay.
Especially when we look at the data that shows that workers send about 80 to 90% of their wages back home, because, you know, for low-wage workers in particular, employers take care of or provide food and accommodation as well as transportation costs. So workers are able to save a lot of their wages, and as I said, send the bulk of it back home. So it has an incredible impact.
Okay. Charlie, we haven't forgotten about you. I just wanted to now bring it back to the idea of the role that sports and that athletes play in you know, putting that extra pressure on that Nicholas was talking about, that is so fundamental in bringing change in human rights. It is amazing what athletes can do because of their high profile, and seeing the T-shirts they've been wearing, the actions they've been taking, even the mention of a boycott that you don't think will actually happen, really does draw attention to an important cause. So tell me what you think for the 2022 World Cup. What you're expecting? Has a shadow already been cast that can't be removed, or will it be lifted? And do you think football fans and players and the world will be able to enjoy this controversial World Cup as much as they've been able to enjoy the others?
Bear in mind as well, this World Cup is going to be played in winter, or European winter anyway, which will make it different, unprecedented. So it's going to feel strange. I think, you know, you look at the 2018 World Cup, and actually, you know, there were controversies there as well going into it. Once it started, you know, people got on board and enjoyed it. I think there will be certainly a shadow cast over the build-up. I think there's going to be a lot of talk. There's going to be a lot of speculation. My sense is when the event starts and the football is good and people really enjoy that, then that will become probably the biggest talking point. But I think certainly in the lead up, you know, these aren't going to be issues that just go away overnight.
Right. I mean, do you still don't expect this to be a truly celebrated event? Because I mean, we had the FIFA scandal with Qatar, and now we're having the labor issue. Do you think that you're still going to be able to forget that when you go to the tournament yourself in person?
No, I think that will always be, right now anyway, that will always be present. There will be those talking points. But as I say, I think looking at Russia 2018 as maybe a comparison, I think once the event starts, people will still be able to enjoy it. But yeah, as you say, I do think that will be a factor. And I think it will be something when people look back on the 2018 World Cup in Russia, the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, that will be something that people remember.
Right.
Maybe only those who are really close to it. Maybe the wider community will just remember the great goals scored by the footballing superstars.
Yeah. Nicholas, quickly, your take?
Yeah, that's why you want a World Cup, because it grabs attention and it grabs eyeballs and deflects attention from other issues. So I think Charlie's right. Once the ball is kicked, a lot of people will probably forget about what's gone into this World Cup, and why the next 18 months is so important, that we do everything we can to get things in place to ensure that once the spotlight disappears, that there's a structure in place and laws in place and they're being properly implemented, and that this World Cup actually has some sort of transformative effect when it comes to the lives of the migrant workers who built it, who made it possible.
Right. And Max, I know you're working on that transformative effect, and we appreciate it. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for this panel. I'd like to thank all three of you really so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it. And thanks, of course, to our viewers for tuning in as well. See you next time.